Everyone says the frontier rewards the strong, but we know it remembers the ones who refuse to walk away. Today's story is about Garrick Vale, a man whose scar became his strength. In the wide emptiness of Red Hollow, everything began with one simple choice: stepping down from his horse. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. A low broken sound drifted across the flats, carried on the desert wind. It wasn't a plea. It was raw and furious pain torn wide open beneath a blazing Arizona sun. Garrick Vale muttered a curse. 10 years back, he'd heard a scream like that. 10 years back, he'd stepped in. Afterward, he'd lowered Elowen Vale and Little Bram Vale into the sand himself, marked their graves with nothing but a crooked post that leaned with the wind. Out in the heart of Red Hollow, a wagon wheel had been planted upright like some cruel monument. Lashed to it was a young Apache woman. Her arms and legs were stretched wide, wrists and ankles bound so tight the rope had bitten deep. Dried blood had baked into the dust around her. Her body shook under the weight of the heat, and she threw her head back, mouth open to the sky. "It hurts. Please, don't do this." Garrick's hand settled on the grip of his old Colt. He didn't draw, not yet. A sharp stab flared through his left shoulder. The old scar burned hot and angry, like a reminder carved beneath his skin. The wind shifted, bringing the smell of scorched sand and shallow graves. He knew the unwritten law of Red Hollow. Don't interfere. Don't ask questions. Don't play hero. The girl saw him. Her eyes were red from pain, but steady. No begging there. Just a hard, searching look, like she was asking him something without words. Garrick let out a slow breath. If he rode away now, that image would follow him into the ground. He swung down from his horse. He had taken no more than 3 steps when he heard it, the steady rhythm of hooves behind him. Not hurried, not nervous. The kind of pace a man keeps when he's used to being obeyed. Knew you'd show up sooner or later. Garrick turned. Darius Crow rode out of the dust haze, long coat, snapping in the wind badge, glinting under the sun. His gaze moved from the wheel to Garrick, cool and calculating, like this scene had already been entered into a ledger somewhere. "What's this Vale Crow called? You standing around for the view these days?" Garrick didn't answer. His eyes stayed on the woman bound to the wheel. Her fingers twitched. The rope had carved deep furrows into her skin, and the dried blood cracked every time she tried to move. The sun bore down like a hammer. "Cut me loose," she rasped. "If you ain't going to help, then ride on." Crow smirked faintly. "Got some fire in her, don't she? She's got a name," Garrick said evenly. "And you're crossing a line." Crow paused, just a fraction too long. "Sora," he said. "Remember it. She's bait." Sora lifted her head despite the pain. "He's lying," she forced out each word rough as gravel. "He wants me silent." Garrick watched Crow's face. Just a flicker in his eyes, gone as quick as it came. The scar in Garrick's shoulder throbbed harder. "You wear a badge and do this," Garrick said quietly. "A man's word's supposed to mean something." Crow gave a thin, humorless laugh. "Words don't keep cattle fed. Out here, softness gets you buried." The wind surged, blasting sand into their faces. The rope scraped against the wood with a sharp hiss. Sora clenched her jaw. She didn't cry out again. Crow rested his hand on the butt of his revolver, not drawing, just reminding everyone who held the edge. "Keep riding, Vale." Darius Crow called out, voice cold as iron. "Don't make this uglier than it needs to be." Garrick Vale drew in a long breath. He saw it again, the sky bleeding red at sundown. A shallow grave carved into hard sand. A promise he'd carried like a chain for 10 long years. No, Garrick said, calm and steady. This time I decide. Crow narrowed his eyes. You're throwing it all away for an Apache girl. For what's right, Garrick answered. And because you forgot what that means. The storm rolled in without warning. One moment the sky burned white, the next it turned the color of ash. Wind tore across the flats, swallowing distance, swallowing light. In the middle of it, Garrick reached for his knife, not his revolver. He stepped toward the wheel. Get ready, he told Sora. She studied him for half a heartbeat, weighing him like a gamble. Then she gave a single nod. The wind screamed. The instant steel met rope, Garrick knew there'd be no stepping back. The sandstorm hit like a wall collapsing. Grit slashed at exposed skin. The air itself felt sharp enough to draw blood. The world shrank to a handful of steps. Garrick moved straight for the wheel, never glancing at Crow again. He pressed the blade to the rope. Hold still, he said. I'll be quick. Sora clenched her teeth. Do it. The first rope gave way. Her body jerked violently. Blood welled from her wrist, dark and thick against the swirling gold dust. Her arm hung useless numb from hours bound tight. Stay with me, Garrick muttered, squinting through the storm. Second rope. Then the third. When the last strand snapped, Sora pitched forward. Garrick caught her not gentle, not rough, just enough to keep her from slamming into the ground. She was shaking hard. Her knees folded. Her legs wouldn't answer her. Let go, she breathed. I can stand. Sure you can, Garrick said. Stand but lean. Somewhere behind them, Crow shouted. The wind tore the words to shreds. Garrick shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around Sora's shoulders, pulling the collar tight against her neck. Sand pelted his face. His left shoulder throbbed hard. The old scar burned like it had been reopened. Blood slowly soaked through his shirt. Your shoulder, Sora said. I'm fine, Garrick cut in. Can you walk, she tried. Her foot barely touched down before she collapsed. Circulation hadn't come back yet. Her muscles betrayed her. Garrick crouched, dragged her arm across his shoulders. Ain't time for pride, he said. Move. They staggered toward a shallow ravine cut into the rock. The wind howled at their backs. Hoofbeats drifted away, then came back again, closer, organized. Why'd he do it? Garrick asked between breaths. Because I know too much, Sora panted. And because I wouldn't stay quiet. So you were supposed to, Garrick asked. No. He gave a slight nod. That's what I figured. Through the swirling wall of sand, a shape began to form ahead of them. Not Crow. Mercer Cade. He stepped out of the swirling sand and planted himself square in their path boots, firm coats snapping in the wind. His revolver hung low in his hand, but it was steady. Crow pays good, Mercer Cade called over the storm. A man's gotta eat. Garrick Vale stopped cold. He eased Sora back against the rock face, shielding her from the wind. You made your choice, Garrick said, voice flat as dry earth. Now you live with it. The shot cracked through the gale. One round. Clean. Mercer Cade screamed and dropped hard into the sand, clutching his leg. Blood spread fast, dark against the pale grit. Not dead, just broken. Garrick watched him for a heartbeat. Live, he said. Tell Darius Crow. Then he turned back to Sora. Move. As the wind howled through the ravine, Garrick understood one thing plain as daylight. He had crossed a line. There was blood on his hands now. But he hadn't lost himself. The storm swallowed the mouth of the ravine whole. Sand skittered low across the ground, slicing at anything it touched. The world narrowed to shadows and shapes. Each breath tasted like burnt dust. Garrick pulled Sora along the rock wall, staying low. His left shoulder throbbed with every step, a deep, grinding ache. Blood continued to seep through his shirt, slow and stubborn. Sora stumbled, then again. She forced herself upright, refusing to sag, but her legs wouldn't answer. She slipped, crashing to her knees in damp sand. "Get up," she growled through clenched teeth. "I can walk." Garrick studied her for a second. He didn't argue. He crouched in front of her and turned his back. "Climb on." "I don't climb." One word. No room for debate. Sora hesitated only a breath before laying her hands across his shoulders. She was lighter than he expected, but even that weight sent a flash of pain through the scar in his shoulder. Garrick locked his jaw, rose to his feet, and kept moving. Each step felt like dragging iron chains. Behind them, hoofbeats echoed again, closer now. Measured. Organized. They slipped through a narrow cut in the rock that opened into a small clearing scattered with stone. The storm thinned just enough to reveal blurred shapes in pursuit. Garrick lowered Sora against a broad slab of rock and scanned the edges of the clearing. "They don't need me breathing," Sora said, voice low. "They just want me quiet." Garrick gave a short nod. "Then don't stop talking." A shadow stepped through the blowing sand. Darius Crow. He halted several yards away, revolver down, but ready, his voice slicing clean through the wind. "That's far enough, Vale. Put her down. We can end this clean." Garrick didn't answer. His eyes flicked toward the only narrow escape between two boulders. Not much room, not much hope. A shot rang out. It struck dirt near his boots, close, but not meant to kill. A warning. Garrick answered with a round fired into the ground, just short of Crow. The gap between them stayed untouched. Neither man advanced. "You still shoot straight," Crow called. "But you can't outrun this forever." Garrick leaned down close to Sora's ear. "When I give the word run for that gap on the left," he murmured, "stay low." "What about you?" Sora asked. Garrick Vale kept his eyes on the storm twisting ahead of them. "I'll be right behind you." She shook her head. "That shoulder's slowing you down." "I know." A brief silence passed between them, tight, heavy. Then Garrick stepped out first, drawing their fire. Gunshots split the air. Bullets shattered against rock sparks, flaring bright in the dust. Garrick returned fire, not aiming to kill, only to pin them in place and buy a breath of space. Now Sora ran. She stumbled once, hit the sand hard, shoved herself back up, and vanished into the jagged rocks. Garrick retreated step by careful step, firing just enough to keep Crow's men cautious. Soon the storm swallowed their trail whole. When they reached shadow again, Garrick let out a slow breath. Not victory, not defeat, just the beginning. The clearing beyond the rocks spread wide. The wind still roared, though less violently. A lantern burned low in the sand. A rough camp stood there, quickly raised but organized. 3 horses tied loose, 2 men on watch, enough to know this wasn't some wandering outfit. Sora leaned against the stone, breathing hard. Her arms still hung stiff and numb, blood soaking through the cloth wrapped tight around it. "There," she whispered. "That's where he keeps the ledger." Garrick glanced down at his shoulder. His shirt was drenched red. The pain cut sharp, but he'd lived with worse. He could ride south right now, put miles between them, and let the law sort it out. But the law wore a badge named Darius Crow. "More people will suffer," Sora said quietly. She wasn't pleading. She was stating truth. Garrick nodded once. "One time. Stay here. I'll handle it." He moved low toward the camp, slipping through tent shadows. Corvin lock turned too late. Garrick slammed the butt of his revolver into the man's temple. Corvin dropped without a sound. No shot fired. Harlan Voss caught sight of him and bolted shouting Crow. The cry tore through the wind and woke the whole camp. Darius Crow stepped into the lantern glow revolver, raised face calm as stone. "You always did favor the hard road, Vale," he said. Garrick stood at the edge, where light met darkness. He didn't advance. He didn't retreat. "Men lost their herds because of you," Garrick said. "Families went hungry." And because of that book, Sora's voice cut in. She stepped into the fringe of lantern light, holding a cloth-wrapped ledger. She flung it into the sand. The cover split open. Pages spread wide, columns of numbers. Names written clear and unforgiving. Proof no man could argue away. Crow swung his gun toward her. Garrick stepped between them, not raising a weapon, just his body. "Go on," Garrick said evenly. "Pull that trigger. Let everyone see what you are." Hoofbeats thundered across the flats. The Red Mesa riders rode in fast dust trailing behind them, men who had once kept their eyes down. Not tonight. They looked at the ledger. Then they looked at Darius Crow. Crow lowered his revolver not out of fear, but because the truth had already turned against him. When the iron snapped shut around his wrists, the lanterns flickered low. The wind drifted through camp carrying the scent of damp sand and something that felt almost like justice. Garrick Vale remained where he stood. He didn't feel like a man who had won. He felt like a man who understood the price and knew it would come due in his name. Morning crept in after the storm, pale and washed thin, as if even the desert had been wrung dry. Darius Crow was taken away, while the sand still held the dampness of night. No cheers followed, no shouting. The Red Mesa riders stood apart in small groups, offering brief nods before turning back to their own lives. Out on the frontier, right and wrong didn't need a crowd. Garrick lowered himself onto a flat stone back to the wind. His left shoulder was wrapped rough and tight. The blood had crusted dark. The ache had not faded. He inspected the wound with slow, measured breaths, the way a man learns to breathe when nights stretch longer than hope. Bootsteps approached. A voice spoke low. "Your contract's been pulled. That's all you need to know." Word traveled quicker than any dust storm. Garrick Vale was no longer a name men hired. He gave a small nod. Honor and coin rarely rode the same trail. Sora stood a short distance away, her arm bound in clean cloth. She held herself straight though fatigue clung to her. She watched the escort disappear over the ridge without a single change in her face. No relief, no sorrow. Just something closing. "You'll be hunted," she said quietly. "Not a threat, just truth." Garrick shrugged. Wouldn't be the first time. They stood beside one another, careful space between them. The wind drifted past, carrying the smell of damp soil and weathered timber. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was heavy. "I have to go back," Sora said. "There are ceremonies I missed, things that can't wait." "Some wounds don't heal on the run," Garrick replied. He had known this moment was coming. How long? A year, maybe more. Garrick reached into his coat and drew out a folded slip of paper. He set it on the rock between them. No insistence, no explanation. "If you ever need a roof," he said, "it's there. No ties." Sora studied the paper for a long time. Then she nodded once. "The wind will choose," she said softly. She turned first. Didn't look back. Not out of indifference, because looking back would have made it harder to leave. Garrick remained where he was until her silhouette dissolved into the wide desert horizon. He felt empty like a canteen drained dry after a hard crossing. But he wasn't broken. Red Hollow stayed as unforgiving as ever. Only one thing had changed. Garrick no longer turned away from what his choices cost, and he knew the silence settling now was only a pause before the next storm. A year passed with no mark carved into it, just one sunrise chasing another, wind that never remembered who had walked beneath it. Garrick Vale built a small ranch outside Tucson. No signboard, no announcement, no wasted noise, fence posts driven deep, a well cut clean and steady, and a house raised strong enough to face the night winds. He worked slow and deliberate, as though each beam he set into place was a quiet vow: stand firm first, stand steady first. Word about Darius Crow reached Garrick Vale in scraps and whispers. Some claimed Crow died sweating out a fever in Yuma prison. Others said a few of his old riders had been drifting through towns asking quiet questions about a lone gun for hire who'd vanished. Garrick never pressed for details. Out here, justice didn't need an audience or a headline. His left shoulder still flared when the weather shifted. The scar never sealed right. He had learned to live with it. The ache served its purpose, a reminder that he had chosen his path, and the bill for it would never be forgotten. One dry afternoon, Quill Fenner rode up asking for water. After he drank and tipped his hat, he added offhand, "South of here, the Apache held a wind ceremony. Named a young woman, their listener." Garrick nodded as if he were being told about cattle prices. No questions, no names. Night settled slow. The wind circled the ranch, steady, unhurried. It slid through the fence rails, brushed the cabin door, and kept on traveling. Garrick sat inside in the dark. No lantern burning. Just listening. Not expecting. Not waiting. Far from there, Sora stood alone atop a ridge of stone. The ceremony had ended. The people had gone back to their fires. Only the wind remained. It did not whisper of wagon wheels or blood. It did not call out the names of the fallen. It did not drag her toward yesterday. It moved forward. Calm. Certain. Sora tightened her grip on the reins. This wasn't about debt. It wasn't about closing something behind her. It was about stepping ahead because she could now stand on her own. As she rode down into the desert, the western sky burned bronze and copper. In the distance, a small ranch rested quiet beneath open sky. Garrick Vale did not know she was riding toward him. Not yet. But the wind did. Sunset bled slow across the horizon, red and heavy like old dried blood. The breeze stayed steady, circling the ranch outside Tucson before drifting past. Garrick Vale was at the fence line, driving posts into hard earth. Hand steady, mind clear. His shoulder throbbed the way it always did before a shift in weather. He didn't pause, just switched the hammer to his other hand and set another post for firm into the ground. Hoofbeats carried in from the west. He didn't turn it once. Out here, spinning too fast could earn you trouble you didn't ask for. He set the hammer down, straightened, and then looked. Beyond the fence, Sora sat mounted in the saddle. Her back was straight, her gaze level. No cloak around her shoulders, no sign of someone in need of rescue. Only a woman who had ridden far enough to know exactly where she stood. They faced each other across the fence boards. No words. The wind passed between them, carrying dust, sun-baked wood, and a year of silence that had never once broken. Garrick Vale gave a single nod, not a greeting, just recognition. "Figured the wind might carry you back," he said. Sora swung down from the saddle and tied the reins with her own hands. She walked to the fence and stopped there. "I didn't ride here to be rescued," she said evenly. "And I won't stay if it costs me who I am." Garrick inclined his head once more. "No one owns anyone on this land," he answered. "We stand shoulder to shoulder if we choose to." A quiet pause settled between them, not strained, not heavy. just enough room for both of them to find their footing. Sora stepped through the gate. Garrick had opened it earlier, though he hadn't waited beside it. They crossed the yard together, no one leading, no one following. Their shadows stretched long across the sand, then slowly fused as the last rim of sun sank below the horizon. Night gathered. The fire inside the house cracked and shifted. No vows were spoken, no promises carved into air, only wind circling the cabin walls and a silence that no longer felt hollow. In Red Hollow, justice never roared, and neither did love. It didn't swear itself aloud. It didn't stake a claim. It didn't demand proof. It endured when two people had paid their dues and chose to stand. Darkness folded over the land like a quiet reckoning. The small stove fire flickered low, not blazing, just steady enough to warm the room. Garrick sat watching the embers glow. His left shoulder throbbed faintly, the scar still marking choices that could never be undone. Outside, the wind drifted around the cabin, brushed the fence rails, then moved on. It carried no promises, only motion. Sora stood in the doorway, looking out across a desert no longer stained by fresh blood. She wasn't searching for protection. She had claimed her ground. Here, no chains bound anyone. Only two souls who had learned the hardest truth: stand steady first, then stand beside. Not to rescue, not to own, but to refuse to turn away when what's right calls your name. Garrick didn't speak much of justice anymore. He had seen too many crimes done under that word. He knew only this: when light rises, darkness retreats. And the weight of that light often falls on those who refuse to step aside. He carried it without complaint, without a pride. He did what needed doing. Then he kept breathing. Sora checked the reins once more, careful and deliberate, as if sealing a choice. She stayed not from obligation, but because her freedom had matured into certainty. Freedom doesn't shout. It comes when you stop running from yourself. When the wind shifts, she will hear it. If the day comes to ride again, she will. And if she remains, she will remain whole. The fire dimmed lower. The night held still. Out on the frontier, a man could grow old and still choose what's right, not with a revolver, but by planting his feet when truth stands before him. Sometimes that is enough. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening and for allowing this story to speak to your heart. The Wild West still holds countless truths, some painful, some tender, all worth remembering. Stay with us, subscribe, comment, and invite others to discover these untamed stories. From our hearts to yours, thank you for being part of this journey. Aviso legal barra disclaimer. Each story shared here is produced for storytelling enjoyment. Certain scenes may include fictional or dramatized elements inspired by historical circumstances. Although AI tools assist us in visuals narration and script development, the emotional tone, editing, and quality control are conducted by people to ensure meaningful experiences. We fully uphold YouTube's policies, using no deceptive recreations or impersonations of real individuals. All creative resources are properly licensed. Unauthorized copying, re-uploading, or remixing is not permitted. Thank you for supporting the effort behind every episode we create.